Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Unstructured Unlocked. I'm co-host Michelle Gouveia.
And I'm co-host Chris Wells.
And we are thrilled to be joined today by Alan Ringvald, co-founder and CEO of Relativity6. Alan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's good to see you guys.
You too. We're excited to have you. So you and I go way back. I know Alan really well, but for those out there that aren't familiar with you and Relativity6, do you mind sharing a little bit about your background and how you got here?
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm not sure how I got here myself. So it'll be a good recounting of that story.
Well, via invitation for sure, at least here.
Good to know. Yeah, so just quickly about myself. Started my first company in college. It was kind of one of those moments where I realized just like a small little insight that doing laundry sucks. And a lot of my friends didn't know how to do it well. And it's actually just a pain point. And I still struggle with it, honestly. And there were a ton of laundromats outside of my college campus. And I was like, why hasn't anyone connected those two things together so that it could be serviced? So built a platform around that. Scaled it while I was still in college to I think it was like 15 schools by the end of it. Ended up continuing on with that company for a couple of years. Sold it to, if you would believe it, there were larger players in this space, and I sold it to the largest player in the space, and then thought building startups was easy. And boy, was I wrong. Which is foreshadowing into everything else. But then I went off to Google for four-ish years, which was great. Really interesting experience, like being there pretty early, like right after the IPO. So I'm dating and aging myself. And it was cool. Like got to do a lot of different things within there. But at the end of it, was looking kind of like that entrepreneurial bug was at me again. And I got the opportunity to help start a candy company in Boston. So I got pitched this idea that somebody wanted to start a company that made candy that tasted like Snickers and Reese's, but came from all kind of naturally sourced ingredients, like good sugars, if that's even possible, like fiber, like make it like a healthy type thing, but make it cool and fun, and compete with Hershey's and Mars and all that. So I thought that was really interesting, even though I didn't kind of have any experience in CPG or anything. I thought it was cool. So I went on and kind of joined the founding team there to try to figure that problem out. So I did that for 2 years, and it was a crazy experience. But, at the end of the day, we got into 30,000 doors on day one. So it was like a very large kind of launch of an unknown brand, which turns out is not a good thing in CPG. So that's a whole nother podcast, but kind of better to start smaller. But everyone loved our value prop. The product was cool, and I learned a lot there. But so I did that for not too long, 2 years. And then I had an interesting situation happen where at that candy company, we actually had a lot of celebrity and athlete type investors. And, one of them, and became pretty friendly with one of the pro athletes that was kind of involved in the product. And when I'd left the candy company, he'd asked me to help him do some kind of marketing and branding and agenting type stuff. Basically, nobody cared about him from a sponsorship perspective when he'd started. And he was like, hey, can you help me figure out what I could do? And this was pre-influencer. So it was let's make you a channel and a brand, and let's connect you with the 7 million other New England Patriots fans that exist that, care about you, and you could make money from them directly at some point. So that was kind of the seed of a larger company that I ended up running, where it was basically doing that for pro athletes kind of across the board and internationally and all that. So did that, and then went off to MIT to first work there in the entrepreneurship kind of department. helping students commercialize ideas, and, ended up getting jealous and then deciding I wanted to go to school there myself. So ended up going to the business school and meeting my now co-founder at the company I'm doing now, which is called Relativity6. So sorry, I know that was longer than I wanted it to be, but hopefully gives you
I'm on the edge of my seat to figure out how all of that gets to Relativity6 and what Relativity6 says. Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense to me, and I love it.
Right. It makes no sense. Exactly.
So what is the common thread there? Like, how do you, as a serial entrepreneur, figure out what to work on and why, and how to make those choices?
Yeah, I think it's just like moment in time, like looking at something and seeing like, could you turn this into some sort of a like business? Always that stuff, always like the mechanics of that always fascinated me. And I figured, my view was like, I'm not smart enough to come up with some idea on my own, like, thinking about it. But if I'm in the world and have context around me, I can see some things, and then love the idea of like executing, like, everyone likes to talk about it, but like, what would it really take to make it real? And I think I have just enough time, like recovery time after each one of them, to forget all the horrible parts. And there are many horrible parts. So yeah.
No, that's great. What are some of those hallmarks that you look for in terms of an idea that's worth executing on?
Yeah, I mean, it's classic, but like, is there real pain, and are there enough people with that same pain to make it worth the while, right? If it's not too custom for like one type of like, is there scale? I've always been fascinated by scale, actually, for whatever reason. It's always my dream to like build something that scales. And that's always, I think that's like the main criteria, actually. And then obviously a pain is a good one. That's why I think the candy company was interesting. There wasn't like enough pain, actually. It was more like us telling you to be healthier. And it's not really like, there's no pain. I mean, there's obvious health pain, like, of course, but that's a later problem for a lot of people, and they just don't want to think about it. It's the whole don't diagnose it, let's fix it later, which is obviously bad, but I think played out in the way that company ended up. Like, it went really big, and then it had to scale down a lot because not enough people, I guess, cared, to be honest.
Michelle, you're going to have to rein me in at some point, but I'm going to keep pulling this thread because I'm fascinated. When you say you're looking at the potential for scale, does that mean it has to be blue ocean, or you're willing to tread into some bloody waters to make that scale happen?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know of a blue ocean for anything that's actually like important or valuable. I would love to swim in those waters, but I'm blood soaked, always have been. So yeah, but you can be faster to market, right? And that's kind of what I'm experiencing at Relativity6 too. I think we hit on an insight, that, not to transition into that too much, but like, because I love talking about the past, but
Alan's reining you in himself, Chris, is what he's saying.
Fair enough. I'll stop.
No, go on. No, but yeah, like, I think if it's valuable enough, eventually the market or the environment kind of gathers for that. But you can be quicker to market. Like, yeah, what we do now, I think we were really fast to market on an obvious problem. And we've had, frankly, like a ton of followers, fast followers. And so if it could start out blue, just to finish the analogy, it can start out blue, but it gets red pretty quickly from my experience. Yeah.
And then let me do one more follow-up. You talked about the pains that you forget after a long enough cool down.
Yes.
Give me your top three.
Top three, what? Painful moments, or what?
Yeah,
like,
what are those things? What's that?
She tries hard to forget those, Chris.
I want you to unpack your trauma for us, Alan.
That's what it sounds like. Yeah.
We've got an hour.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, I mean, it's just the pang of, I think, uncertainty that you live with, I think, is the hardest. It doesn't go away, right? Like, you're always, you don't know. It is a good and bad thing. You don't know the future of what's going to happen. Like, typically when you work at a big corporate job, you kind of know what's going to be going on in 6 months for the most part, right? Like, you kind of have a sense of that, like you've had a routine and you have expectations from the greater company and all that. It's something like this. For a very long time, you have no idea what things are going to look like in 6 months. And it's painful, but also the reason you do it, I think. But kind of just walking, it doesn't go away, right? You walk around with it on the weekend, you walk around it with your friend, when you're with your friends, or you're at a movie, like it's not, you wear it, and it just, it can get to you after a while, to be honest. Because there's just a lot of uncertainty you're living with.
No, I'm worried. Are you taking care of yourself?
Not enough. This is helping, actually. Therapy's so expensive. This is perfect. Thank you.
That's how we'll market this episode.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Balanced therapy hour. It's perfect.
So I will bring it back a little bit, Alan. Can you talk a little bit about what Relativity6 does?
Sure.
Yeah. And how the idea came about? Yeah.
100%. Yeah. I guess the best way I can say it is back when I was in school, long time ago now, it was more just like, okay, AI and ML is very powerful and interesting. Lifetime value is something I've always thought about as well in all the companies that I've been with, involved with, and I always thought that would unlock so much if you could actually do that well. So broadly speaking, it was like a project about, could we bring the most modern like ML techniques together with data, whether that's external or internal, and start being accurate around LTV. And that's got a lot of different expressions. One would be around churn. One would be around obviously projecting out future spend. There's other we kind of came out with 8 different components around LTV. We went with one for way too long, and the winner was actually sitting there the whole time. So for the first 5 years of the company, we went around selling around churn and retention and detecting propensity to churn. And another one of those models was around upsell, cross-sell. So they kind of 2 components, and it was an interesting talking point. It's certainly, in my opinion, not a scalable business for a lot of different reasons, but we went down that path for a while. And it wasn't until, and so we started the company in late 2016, actually. And it wasn't until 2021, Q2 of 21, that we took another one of our components and turned that into a company and scale that from effectively 0 to multiple millions of ARR in a very short amount, 18 months or so, and about 50 customers within insurance, by basically having one core insight and one core thing that we were solving. And that thing was,
drumroll please.
Here we go. It's answering the question of what is it that a company actually does. Now, that sounds kind of ridiculous. And when I tell my friends that, they're like, what do you mean that's not a thing? But it turns out it's actually really hard to figure out if a carpenter is a carpenter or if a carpenter is a roofer. They look alike. They have the same kind of names. They do a lot of the same type of work. It's just a roofer is way riskier than a carpenter from a pricing perspective, let's say, in insurance, right? And specifically, as you think about contractors, they're a tough class of a tough segment because of the nature of their jobs. If they're on a job site and then a customer is like, "Hey, can you fix my roof?" A lot of times out of 10, they're going to say, "Yeah, sure, I'll figure that out," right? And now they're roofing. And eventually over time, they build that arm up and then they start offering roofing. But did they tell their broker that they started with that they're doing that? Or are they updating their website that they did that? A lot of times they're not. So that's a class where insurance gets that wrong a lot. And the cost of misclassifying is immense.
Yeah. Can you connect the dots there between knowing exactly what, you're underwriting some risk, right? It's some company. How does that connect to lifetime value? Yeah,
no, for sure. I think the point is that risk can and does change, right? Just think about your company, the companies you guys work for. are they doing the same thing that they did when they started, right? There's always an evolution of sorts. And sometimes those changes aren't really a big deal, but sometimes they really are, right? They have like very big implications on LTV and, like, broadly speaking, what they should be paying, right? Like, insurance is great because they have a lot of history most of the time around like product lines and like what's going on. But the hard part is just understand it. Like, so we know that roofers are dangerous, right? Like the fourth most dangerous job in America. Like every time I walk by something and I see someone like on a roof, I'm like scared that I'm gonna have to like catch them or something. Like they always look wobbly every time. I don't know why, but every time I look at a roofer, it looks like they're like kind of wobbling around. So very dangerous, right? But also very hard to detect that that's what they're doing most of the time if they're not coming out and saying they're a roofer. So that's really that's really the value prop of and you can translate that into all different kinds of segments. The way that I like to pitch Relativity6 is, your large B2B database providers, no need to name names. We all buy their data, and there's good reason to buy their data for sure. But they really tell you what a company was. And our mission and what we do and what we strive to do for our customers is we try to tell you what a company is right now, right? So that's the difference of the two things. And we feel like there's a real category and home for that, which is what we're driving towards. And we continue to stay focused on industry. It's again, it sounds so easy, but it's an incredibly hard problem. Insurance specifically misclassifies 50% of the submissions that they get and that they bind, actually. So huge implications for carriers. So, and again, like, hard problem. A lot of people now, I think, trying to solve it, kind of coming in, people have been there before us, but like, I think coming in the new wave of like, how do you do it with new methods, which is kind of what we're doing. But why I feel comfortable with all that is I know it's an incredibly hard problem, and everyone else looking at this is they're doing other things, right? They're like kind of wrapping it around other product offerings and, getting specific about which industries they focus on or the user types they focus on. Like, they're going to do things for under. And so for us, we're so obsessed with solving this specific problem that we know where the gaps are, and we're spending our resources fixing those gaps, whereas others are they're not going to be able to spend the resource or time to solve it holistically like we're striving to do. So it's it takes a lot of discipline because every day somebody comes out with asking for a new thing that hopefully we can build, but just trying to like remember past experiences and stay focused and execute. I think, it's cliche, but there's always going to be noise. There's always going to be new competition. There's always going to be something. But if you can just get up every day and like actually put in the work, I think that's, all you can really. Sorry, I'm sounding like a self-help book or like something, but
well, we've already established what this hour is for.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
So no worries.
I have to pay some royalties to Adam Green.
Right.
One question for you, Alan. So you're obviously solving, based on what you just said, the accuracy metric, right? So how correct or how accurate can you be when you're pricing these? Is there also a reduction in time metric that you guys measure against, right? So these underwriters are having to sift through submission, data, having to validate that data. In a lot of cases, probably manual research. How does Relativity6 improve the both of those metrics, right? The accuracy and the time to process.
Yeah, no, for sure. I don't know if you've ever taken a name and address and then tried to map it to a 6-digit NAICS code or like an ISO code, and
all the time in my spare time. That's my hobby.
Michelle's hobby. It's weird.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I would feel bad for you if that was true, because it's a miserable task. It really is.
To be clear, I'm not here because I need that kind of help. I'm good.
Sure. But yeah, so like we automate away that, right? Like the internet research that you would do. And like the reason you need that versus like going to large B2B database providers, because most times when you're looking for that code on those big database providers and it's a smaller business, right? It's not it's usually not right. Like we're classified by a lot of these major B2B database providers as a furniture store. Like I swear, like that's actually, yeah. So it's just bad. It's not useful at all. So like that's why we feel like so kind of confident in continuing to focus on just this, I guess.
Yeah. So I want to zoom out maybe one level. How does your solution fit into the overall process? Like, where does it start? Where does it end? What's that look like?
Yeah. So I think it's very impactful at the way top of the funnel, right? As high up as you can go, the better. So like either at the retail broker level or at the carrier submission level, like I guess pre-fill is the term used, right? Mm-hmm. So user fills in some basic information about a company and then some auto suggest about what that company actually does show up, and then you go through the flow. So that's a very popular way that our product is utilized. So that's one. And then just as you like work your way down the flow, before something is bound, if you're, kind of embedded within an underwriter's bench or platform that they're working out of, very valuable there as well. Post-bind audit, right? So we've bound it, but we have a little bit of period of time just to double check then, and then pre-renewal as well. Like, has anything changed before we go out and renew this policy? So I'd say those are the four, but I think generally speaking, what is cool in the future, and I think where things should go actually is more of a continuous monitoring versus, in stages. Certain segments of businesses are always changing. And I think it's important that underwriters are alerted to that as much as necessary, right? Over that, but, certain moments in time, it could be really useful to know, what your risk profile is as a carrier, really, right? Like, fine, maybe we classify them as a carpenter and they're really a roofer, but what's our exposure for the rest of the year? Like, let's keep tabs on this company and see like kind of what's going on. Like, I think that's really.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say it's like repricing a portfolio every day for an asset management company, right?
Well said. Yeah, that's exactly right. And like, why can't that be done in P&C insurance? It can, it's just, it should, I think, because businesses do change, like especially small ones, and they go in and out of business all the time. And there's just a lot of advantage for anyone who wants to take that seriously.
Yeah, like you guys are no longer.
We talked a lot on the podcast about like when you're partnering with vendors or when you're trying to automate a process, being fully kind of tuned into what you're actually trying to solve for. What are the metrics that matter and that are really important? And Chris talks a lot about like the baseline of accuracy, right? Like you're never going to get to that 100% accuracy, but sure. What's like when you are partnering or going into insurance carriers or brokers and pitching, is there like a surprise or a shocked moment when they run a pilot with you and they have no idea how inaccurate maybe some of their book was, or like what's that process like? Like when you're selling this underwriting automation solution to them, like what are they looking for? What are you actually solving for them?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And this is a, pretty subjective data point in many ways, which is interesting. Like the three of us could look at a business and like, depending on sometimes how we feel, kind of grade them differently. Mm-hmm. I mean, and that's the reality of how it goes, right? They're human underwriters looking at things and human brokers also looking at things. So context really matters when you're grading, right? So I think for us, honestly, it's much more about them buying into you versus like the hard, like pilot, because there isn't a one-to-one answer a lot of the times. And if you're like comparing us to something that the underwriter did last year, right? They graded it, like, no offense to underwriters at all, right? They do a lot of different things, but they get this data point wrong a lot, like, as any person would when they're going through things. So we try to like, I think with us, at least at this point, we have enough customers that keep using us and renewing us and all that to say like, this is impactful, this is effective. You're probably running around 50% accuracy right now. We're in the like 80s to 90s, depending on input. So like, that's just, you're going to get significant gains. And at this point, buy into our methodology and what we've kind of proved versus like, let's look at us versus that. It's like when it starts getting into that, I understand there's a need and we're happy to do them. It's just, it always has to come with the caveat of like, look, like that's not really the right way, in our opinion, to judge this. The real way to judge is to put it into production over time and see the gains that you get and measure that way. So it's imperfect, but insurance is I think one advantage is it is a trust relationship industry. And this translates to that as well. And it's not a fast or first mover, right? So the fact that I can say, we have Liberty Mutual and blah, 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 like a lot of different other large carriers, customers, goes an incredibly long way. And then the customers vouch for you. And so I think that to me is more important. And even in the pilot, like testing stage of like, look, here's how we do it. Here's what we do. Are we perfect? No, absolutely not. This is really hard. But guess what? We're the only team 100% focused on it being right. So we're incentivized to be as good as possible. And you want that too. So we're aligned in terms of how we like want to work together. And it served us well. Like the product is great, but it's not, I guess, all just about the product. It's the feedback loop, which matters a lot. Better training data matters a lot. Like we're very transparent about our process. And the cool thing is we know how to improve, and we do improve tangibly as we go, which has been a fun part of it, like working in this space, I think.
All of that.
Yeah, I'll shut up.
No, this is great stuff. It triggers a bunch of thoughts for me. One is you talked about how evaluating what a company is and does is a bit subjective, and then you gave a concrete number for accuracy. So what are the ingredients of that accuracy metric that you're talking about?
So sorry, just to make sure I had it. So like, how do we actually measure confidence and accuracy of a prediction?
What's ground truth, for example, that you're comparing?
Yeah, no, for sure. So for us, our product's constantly evolving, but like a big value prop is we're live, meaning like we're going onto multiple search engines in real time, including our own. So we've actually built our own from scratch and use that as well. Yes, we've indexed the web, which is crazy, but I think a huge advantage for us. But like, so the value prop is that, and then confidence and accuracy is related to were we able to detect this entity with like a level of confidence, right? Like, could we find this company on the public web somewhere? And that's a huge component. And then the other huge component is, there's about 1,000 or so classes of business. And we're actually very transparent about the strength of those classes. And, that's related to the training data quality. So if they those are above a certain threshold, it'll be above a certain score. So we give a confidence score with every prediction. And what's cool and sounds like, oh, that's so obvious, but like what we work really hard on is consistency around the confidence score. Meaning like if it's a 0.7, that means it's 70% accurate. If it's 0.8, it's 80%, right? Stuff like that. So that underwriters and underwriting groups and managers can confidently set a threshold basically and trust that. And then they have their own risk tolerance for accuracy at that point, right? It's just a lever that they pull. So hopefully that answers it.
Super helpful. If only all meteorologists were as disciplined as you all are. The other thing I wanted
Sadly,
to say,
they are not.
I think Michelle and I can both validate for you that there is a prime mover problem in insurance buying technology, but then at the same time, no one wants to be the last mover, and so you get a lot of peer behavior, and so what you were talking about really resorts with me.
Yeah, no, it's a tough way to go to market for sure. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
It's okay. The other thing I want to do is sort of switch directions a little bit. And you talked about underwriting, how underwriters do their jobs. We've heard a lot that there's a talent gap in underwriting. And I was just curious your thoughts on where the opportunities are in the Insurtech stack to shore that up, and how Relativity6 really helps in and of itself.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, from my perspective, what I'm hearing on that end and how that impacts us, ultimately, it's what I'm hearing is just really hard to hire, good underwriters. And you need really good underwriters to have a really good business. So a priority that I'm hearing on the underwriting side is, help my underwriters have a better experience, right? Let's help them do their jobs more effectively. Like, let's not have them do redundant things. Let's have them do value added things. And so any area where you can audit, like we were saying kind of like jokingly before, like Michelle, right? Like you like researching, like give you a name and research it. That's non-value added work. And the thing I didn't say, it can take 15, 20 minutes to locate the business, assess what they do, and then map it to a class code. And then you might have to do that hundreds of times in a day. Will Relativity6 and others solve that 100%? No, but it could take away a lot of the work. Like, though, that's the way I position it. Also, is like, what if I could take away a large chunk of this from your day? Not all of it, but a lot of it. Is that still valuable to you? And the answer is always yes, because it's non-value added work that they shouldn't. Like, a machine can help here. So that's kind of that's how it's impacting us. Is it's just creating more demand for stuff like ours that can take care of the underwriters that are already there and kind of like supercharge them as much as when.
Thanks.
I'm going to I'll pivot from that too. The topic that is on everybody's minds recently, right, is generative AI, especially Chat GPT. And, we've talked, machine learning and AI solutions have been around for years, and insurance carriers and Insurtechs have been leveraging those capabilities. But it seems that now that it can be in each individual's hands, there's new, excitement about it. What are you hitting up against when you're talking to insurance carriers or underwriters about Relativity6 vis-a-vis a Chat GPT like solution? And then actually, how do you think about AI becoming more available at the hands of an underwriter, how it would impact that talent gap that we were just talking about?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think about that one a lot, right? Like, when that launched, especially ChatGPT 4, like a real moment. That was like a moment that I think a lot of us in the space didn't see. Like, a lot of people got caught a little bit flat-footed, to be honest about it. Very powerful, interesting technology. Like, I use it in my day-to-day life, actually, a lot. And it's really valuable in a lot of different ways, for sure. But as it relates to kind of what we're doing or other AI companies, is actually very interesting. Like, the way that I guess the describe is this concept of I'm butchering this phrase, I can't, but it's like the master of none thing. Like, it's like, you're a jack of all trades. Like, it's a very general intelligence, and that's insanely cool. The fact that it can answer a million different types of questions about types of things, but it's not going to be your go-to for niches or specific things that you might need. It's just not ever going to, the generalization of it creates, there are papers written about it, and you can think what you think, but there is a deterioration, we believe, happening with it because of how general it is. Like, there is fluctuation in quality, generally speaking, and inconsistencies at scale. I mean, what's happening from a compute perspective right now is absolutely insane. Like, what has to happen behind the scenes for ChatGPT to run is like a miracle. Like, it's crazy. And I think it's very early days in that. So you are seeing some fluctuations in that. But I think if you're a carrier and you're thinking about it, it's like it's so tempting to get into it, and it makes sense. But I would just caution that you'd have to have a relationship with Microsoft directly and not at all go with whatever's out there for consumers, because terms and conditions constantly, like we're looking at every day, like they're constantly changing. You can't call someone if there's a problem. Like you can't put it into a workflow in any way. Not only from like, so that's on like the technical business side of it. Like there's no enterprise contract to sign unless you're like a very, very large company, right? And so like it's very early days. I think it basically opens everyone's minds up as to what is possible, but there's a on the ground reality of when you're working in a regulated industry, there's privacy and IP concerns, like who owns what, like what kind of data are you feeding in? I know you can turn it off, but the fact that that's even the fact that you can turn it on and off means they're not really, like privacy has come second or third or fourth here. It's not something that it's not top of mind as they're scaling this. Would be a concern if I was a bank or insurance company. So there's that. And then the technical concept of like, unless you're talking to like top brass at Microsoft right now, they can shut you off at any moment. And so like putting this into a key workflow is pretty reckless, we found. But all of that said, we do like it. We use it when we can. There's actually really interesting internal uses for it. But yeah, so I mean, all kinds of things. Sorry.
So what you're saying is the insurance regulators love it, or are going to love it, is what you're saying. Yeah.
It's it's crazy, right? It's crazy. Like I know a lot of carriers, tell their, their employees not to use it. And I think that might put it into a workflow or to rely on that data for something as important as underwriting. And by the way, if you actually read OpenAI's terms and conditions, you can't use any of their information on ChatGPT for credit or lending decisions now. Which is so like if you're using it, it's just, but that's constantly shifting, right? Like we're so early in it that I think it's going to be a side thing for a long time, and that it's good. Like again, like it opens everyone's minds up, but it's not the old reliable that you're looking for when you're putting it into like, into a stack that's like important for making money, in my opinion.
Okay, Alan, we're coming up last 10 minutes. This is where I ask you to pull out your crystal ball. So, two-part question. One, do large enterprises get comfortable with sending their data over the wire to like an Azure or a Google or an AWS for large language models? Or do they get serious about pulling large language models behind their own firewall and running them themselves?
Okay, so I think I got that. Basically, your crystal ball question. Will carriers be comfortable doing some of this Gen AI type stuff with partners, or are they going to want to build their own ecosystems for it?
Yep.
I think it's yeah, perfect. No, I mean, I think it's going to be a blend, right? It depends on the organization. I mean, today, you could work with companies with AWS or Azure, kind of where like, as part of your environment. I think the key thing is comfort around one key thing, which is, can I delete my data and who controls it and where is it? Like, I want to know where it is. Like, can you tell me where it is? And then if I feel like it tomorrow, I can press a button and it's deleted and you can show me that it's deleted. I think if those things are true, I think they'll definitely be open to it. There are always going to be those carriers that want to do everything themselves and, have the resources to do that. It's going to be really expensive, like crazy expensive. I don't even know if they're even understanding like the level of compute needed, especially as more use cases open up and all that. But I think the majority of the carrier world will be okay with like AWS or Azure or any one of those large, again, assuming they can totally buy into the fact that you actually have control. I think that's the big issue right now is like you use ChatGPT right now, you have no idea where that's going and who's using it for training and all that terrifying fun stuff. And like, that's one of our value props, right? Is, we have a private cloud. At any moment, you press a button and it's deleted. It's yours. There's no one else owning it but you, and all those things. So I think it'll evolve into that, though.
Okay. And then second part of my crystal ball question is the following. Say companies do try to build this behind their firewall with their own large language model resources. Are they training like an underwriting GPT? Is it a carrier X GPT general across the org? Which way do you think that goes?
Interesting.
That's a good question.
Yeah, it is. Right, because you're sitting on so much proprietary information, right? That's really cool. Like that's I bet, or what I would do is definitely not. I mean, it depends. Like, if a carrier has an internal initiative, right? That's going to be the other question: is are they going to bring in the talent to make that stuff happen? Back to your talent question, like internally or not, and that's going to be a major investment. Otherwise, there could be opportunities for companies, but it's going to be bespoke, I think, for a lot of it, right? It's back to my fear of scale, right? Like, can you scale that if you're building internal models for proprietary data sets that you can't transfer over? Wouldn't be something I would want to personally get into, but like, I'm sure there's a whole world of consultants that would be like ready to do that. So, yeah, I mean, I think because the key to this at the end of the day is going to be proprietary quality training data, and there's always going to be better transformers and neural networks and stuff like that, right? Like, it's just going to come down to that resource, like that really, really important resource of like this data that no one else has. And right, so they should do it themselves, in my opinion. It's a good question.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for that prediction, Alan. We'll have to see what comes true over the next few years. But
yeah,
it is now recorded, right? It is here recorded to stay. Your response,
yeah. Can't go back.
As always, ChatGPT is a solid place to end. Thanks again for joining us. This has been another episode of Unstructured Unlocked. I'm co-host Michelle Gouveia.
I'm co-host Chris Wells.
And we were joined today by co-founder and CEO of Relativity6, Alan Ringvald. Thanks again for coming in.
Of course.
Really good to talk to you, Alan.
Yeah, that was fun.